Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Tonight, we're diving into ancient Roman surgery, a place where every operation was a symphony of blades, groans, and divine luck. Bronze knives, oil lamps, blood-stained tunics, and the scent of fermented wine. Nothing like a hospital. No sterilization, no sanitation, just wiped with cloth or left in the sun. No diploma required. If you once butchered a pig, congratulations, you're now a surgeon. Bare hands, sweat dripping, hair tied back with a flax string. No gloves, no anesthesia. No one asked, "How are you feeling?" Bandages were dirty rags, dusted with ash, smeared with honey or dried dung. A mix of sweat, wine, and infected pus. Before we begin, if you truly find this to be a peaceful place to hide out late at night, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you really want to. Like the rules in an old tavern, only if you need a quiet corner. And you know what I love the most? Reading the comments, seeing where you're from and what time it is for you. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're here, and I see you. Now, dim the lights, turn on a small fan if you have one, not because it's hot, but for that gentle humming sound. You open your eyes. There's no nurse calling your name, no IV drip, no scent of rubbing alcohol, only cold stone beneath your back, a dirty cloth loosely draped over your chest, and the flickering of an oil flame dancing on the ceiling. You want to believe this is a dream, but the sound of a blade being sharpened right by your ear sobers you more than a double shot of espresso. In front of you is a man, either a doctor or a retired blacksmith, hair a bird's nest, beard unshaven since the reign of Augustus. On his tunic, dried blood, possibly from a previous patient or last night's dinner. He squints at you, yawns, then mutters like he's counting morning fog. Well, you're awake. Good. Awake patients show better reactions. Reactions to what, you want to ask? But your mind is spinning. You don't remember what happened. Fell off a horse, got beaten, or just a stomachache in the wrong neighborhood. Part of you hopes this is a prank, some bizarre religious rite, or a medical drill for new recruits. But looking into his eyes, you know, no one acts that well. Your mouth is dry as the Judean desert, and your hands are gently tied to the sides of the table for safety by the standards of the time. You start to feel a chill, but it's not fear. It's the marble beneath you sucking heat from your body like a prehistoric ice trap. This isn't an operating room. It looks like a monk's dining hall, minus the chairs. Low ceiling. Flickering oil lamp barely keeping up, casting the doctor's shadow tall and monstrous on the wall. The air smells of dried blood, bronze, sour wine, and humanity. So thick you swear you can taste it. In the corner, a steady drip of water. Drip, 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 like a countdown to when the blade meets skin. No gleaming tray of tools, just a basket. Inside, knives, clamps, bronze sewing needles, and a cup of wine, still full. You're not sure what's worse, the wound you're carrying, or the doctor's bloodshot eyes, sleep-deprived, or drunk on fermented grapes. And the longer you watch him, the worse it gets. He just used the scalpel to scratch his back, then casually wiped it on his sleeve. At one point he mumbled to a bone hook like it was a co-worker. So, where should we start? He raised his wine, clinked it gently against the marble table like a toast, then looked at you and smiled, like a man about to try a new dish on the menu. Perhaps the only thing you have left is hope. not hope for anesthesia. Hope that he's not too drunk to remember where your heart is. In ancient Rome, being a doctor didn't require a degree, no medical board, no license. You just had to have seen someone do it once, or worse, be really good at butchering chickens. That was enough. Some doctors were trained slaves. Some were retired soldiers looking for steady income, as long as the patients didn't die too fast. Some hadn't studied anything beyond memorizing the names of leaves. In Rome, you could cut someone open just because you were old, bearded, and once touched a goat's liver without dying. That was enough for someone to call you medicus. Tomorrow, someone breaks their leg in front of your house. Boom, you're officially in healthcare. Romans loved knowledge, but they also loved guessing and gossip. Some doctor training schools were just 3 old men sitting at the marketplace, sharing tips on curing coughs with goat honey and hot stones. One man even claimed he once successfully operated on a talking pig. No one ever confirmed the talking part. A doctor might say, "I studied in Alexandria." No one checked. No one called the university. As long as he said it, held a sharp knife, and had the kind of distant stare that made you think he was pondering the cosmos, that was enough to convince patients they were in the hands of a genius. And if someone died on the table, it was because the gods were angry, or the patient had weak spirits. Never the doctor's fault. In fact, patients were sometimes expected to apologize for dying too soon and not giving the doctor enough time to shine. Some who survived surgery even got a play-by-play from the doctor afterward, detailing what he heroically did, then politely asked, "If you live another 2 days, please pass this story on to the next generation." There were treatments for broken bones that included heating the knife in coals, tapping the knee, and sprinkling cat ash around the pain to ward off evil. You laugh. Don't be too quick. There's a documented case of removing a stomach object. The doctor cut the wrong side, forgot to sew it back up, yet was hailed as a living genius because the patient survived 2 more days. He just packed it with fig leaves, tied it with flax string, then said, "Pus is the body releasing poison." And indeed, the wound festered in classic Roman fashion. That patient lived 3 more days. In Roman times, that was a miracle. Medicine back then wasn't based on science. It was based on belief. And that belief was strong enough, sometimes to save a life. The problem was, that belief usually came from the one holding the knife, not the one lying on the table. You think ancient medical tools were primitive? Not exactly. They weren't just primitive. They looked like they wanted you to run away from your own body. Imagine a scalpel curved like a cat's claw, blunt tip, wooden handle, rusty, and smelling like it was just pulled from an old butcher shop. A blood clamp made of bronze, heavy, stiff, handcrafted so poorly that no 2 looked the same. Some looked like hairpins, others resembled grilled chicken frames. Scalpel, used to cut veins, sometimes also used to shave hair. Valsella, bone fragment forceps, also used for extracting teeth. No one knew when it was for which. Speculum, opening tool, used for the nose, ears, and a place you don't want to know. Spathamile, a wooden stick to stir medicine or poke wounds to let blood circulate. Pus extractor, looks like a bamboo tube, hollow, not clear if it was ever cleaned after use. One doctor once proudly said, "I have over 40 instruments." But if you asked what they were for, he'd answer, "I don't know. I just use whatever." For example, in a case of removing a wood splinter from a thigh, he began with a scalpel, slicing like opening an envelope, then switched to a blood clamp because it looked about right. When blood sprayed, he quickly stuffed in a piece of cloth, then grabbed the pus extractor, pressing it on the wound like he was juicing sugarcane. To finish the surgery, he cleaned the tools by placing them near an oil lamp for warmth, then wrapped them in cloth. All while the patient lay in suspicious silence, and his guardian spirit sighed in the background. And because there was no sterilization, those tools often had pus, dried blood, rust, and hair. One time, a human fingernail was found inside a surgical tool. No one knew if it belonged to the doctor or the last patient, because they didn't know what bacteria were. They believed in toxic air, bad blood, or the wrath of Mars. So instead of cleaning instruments, they would pass them through fire if they remembered, or blow the dust off with a puff. Some tools were even engraved by blacksmiths to soothe the patient's spirit. Doctors would hold them up one by one, introducing them like handmade crafts at a fair. This one was custom made, has Apollo engraved on it, so it cuts very gently. This clamp extracts teeth real fast, unless it clips the tongue by accident. This one? No idea what it's for, but doesn't it look cool? Imagine being cut open by a knife engraved with a smiling lion's face. What do you think? No idea, but at least you'd have a story to tell, if you survived. Roman medical tools weren't useless. They could save lives, but they could also kill hope, like a double-edged sword held by a drunk hand. They were like a best friend at a drinking party. They could help you fight for justice, or accidentally stab you in the middle of a wild gesture. Survival didn't always lie in the blade itself, but in how sober the person holding it was. You might find it funny, but for hundreds of years, Roman doctors had no concept of medical hygiene. They didn't wear gloves, didn't wash their hands with soap, didn't wear masks, and certainly never said, "Are you allergic to anything?" They walked into surgeries right after hunting, shopping, or arguing with their wife. Their hands still had grease, ash, or olive oil from who knows where. They weren't worried. On the contrary, they were confident to a terrifying degree. One Roman doctor once wrote, "My hands have touched the intestines of both the living and the dead, and I still enjoy dinner every night." Sounds like bragging, but to the patient under the knife, it was a delayed death sentence. Today, you might walk out of a clinic if the doctor doesn't change gloves. In ancient Rome, the doctor wiped his hands on his hair, patted you on the shoulder, and said, "It's fine. I trimmed my nails this morning." The difference lay in belief, and the number of people who survived after putting faith in the wrong place. Why didn't they wear masks? Because they believed diseases came from bad smells, not droplets. The stench of feces, rot, and corpses were considered the cause of illness. But a doctor's breath? Never questioned, even if it reeked of wine and roasted onions. Instead of disinfecting, some doctors performed simple rituals, dipping their hands into rosemary-infused water, which had changed color from days of reuse. They murmured prayers to Asclepius, then plunged their hands into open wounds, believing a clean spirit means clean hands. And since there were no gloves, every surgery was direct contact blood control. That means bare hands, reaching into your body, navigating by touch. There's a record of a doctor inserting his hand into a patient's abdomen to untwist the intestines, while chatting with an assistant who was busy pressing grapes into wine in the corner. Blood splattered onto his arms. He wiped it with his sleeve, then went back to chewing on a half-eaten fig. If lucky, they'd find the liver. If not... We searched carefully, but it seems your intestines are a bit misplaced. Imagine lying on the table. The doctor leans in. No mask, no gloves. He burps, then says, "I can sense your stomach's condition through your skin's scent." And you realize, this isn't a doctor. This is a man who trusts his own gut more than medical science. Their confidence didn't come from knowledge. It came from habit, pride, and the ability to ignore consequences. So sometimes, what killed the patient wasn't the wound, but the absolute faith in an unwashed hand. In ancient Rome, the concept of anesthesia was like magic. Those who had it were blessed by the gods. The rest just had to endure. Because anesthesia by drugs didn't exist. Anesthesia by knowledge, not invented yet. Anesthesia by old wine and emotionless encouragement. Exactly. Before cutting, the doctor handed you a cup of wine. Not aged, just encouraged by saying, "Drink it all, then lie still." Before you could respond, the blade was already gliding across your skin, and you understood. This wasn't anesthesia. This was a spiritual trial. There's a record of a twisted intestine surgery. The patient was given 3 cups of ginger-infused wine, then lay still. During the hour-long surgery, they didn't make a single sound, but their fingernails shredded the stone table, leaving blood and skin behind like a final message. The doctor, meanwhile, was muttering, "The liver is trembling. Good. That means he's alive." Some doctors used rosemary, pine smoke, or rubbed oil on the forehead to calm the nerves. Some lit candles, burned incense, and told the patient to hold their breath to keep the blade straight. But the truth was, you still felt pain. You still screamed. And they still continued. One doctor sighed when a patient cried out, "I told you." Screaming throws off the blade. Then he resumed surgery with the disappointed look of a poet whose verse had just been ruined. Scream too loud, not allowed, because at the time, groaning was thought to disturb the yin-yang balance. You had to stay silent, or at least groan while lying still and feeling grateful. One doctor once said, "A real man doesn't groan while having his abscess drained. He just clenches his teeth and remembers his ancestors." On the battlefield, Roman soldiers had limbs cut, arrows pulled, bellies stitched, fully conscious. And the strange part, it was praised. Pain without complaint. Honor. Fainting from pain. Weakness. You weren't allowed to scream, but you could. Curl up like a boiled cat, as long as you didn't bother the doctor. Because he was very busy guessing whether the gurgling in your belly was blood or your intestines reacting to the wine. Chugging wine in one go. If it didn't get you drunk, it might numb the pain. Stuffing mint leaves in your nose. Pain in one place cancels pain elsewhere. Sniffing burning goat hair distracts the brain. No one dared say they were effective, but at least they looked like they were trying. Ancient Rome didn't make your pain go away. It taught you to endure it in silence, not because of medical ethics, but because the doctor was drunk and couldn't stand noise. You've drunk the wine. You're lying still. And now, as the first blade sinks in, all you can do is pray the doctor's hand doesn't tremble today. You feel every slice against your skin, not like a sudden cut, but slow, steady, like slicing meat. Each time the blade touches the soft tissue beneath, the doctor exhales gently, like a chef checking the tenderness of grilled meat. You hold your breath, not from pain, but from the fear that if you move, that blade might slip and cut into something you haven't yet lived. Removing a splinter from your thigh by cutting twice the size of the original wound. Amputating a gangrenous leg. No anesthesia, just hold tight. Drilling into a skull to release toxic vapors from the brain and hope not to drill into memories. Cutting open an abscessed belly to suck out the pus, then smearing it with a mix of honey plus straw ash to speed healing. One doctor once wrote, "I removed a tumor with a cleaver, simple, quick, and the blood flowed in the right direction." You read that and wonder, what's the right direction for blood to flow? Outward. Once, a patient turned their head and asked, "What are you doing?" The doctor didn't even look up, cutting as he replied, "I'm not sure, but your intestines seem a bit misplaced." And he continued slicing, calm as if cleaning a storage room, not searching for a real liver in a living body. Most surgeries happened in stone rooms, no electric lights, no blood pressure monitors. At best, there were flickering candles, and the eyes of gods carved in statues in the corner, also shaking their heads in disapproval. There were no modern sutures. Wounds were stitched with animal tendons, flax fibers, or, if short on supply, old shoelaces. After that, the doctor would sprinkle some ash or crushed charcoal powder to keep the wound clean. Clean as in, hopefully the gods will protect what's left. Some cases were successful. The patient survived, walked again, and became someone touched by Jupiter. Others were called learning experiences for future generations. Doctors didn't take notes, no medical records. If the surgery failed, he'd look up at the sky, sigh, and say, "Guess the gods didn't like this one." And the next day, the same blade was used again, after being lightly rinsed in a stream, where someone had just finished doing laundry. In ancient Rome, every surgery was a battle, not between human and disease, but between belief, the blade, and death, all standing by the table, waiting to see who arrives first. No medical degree, no exams, no one checking if the doctor today was even sober. The only thing done before surgery, praying, not praying for the patient, but for the doctor himself, so the gods would steady his hand, or at the very least, not make him forget where the liver is. Before each operation, some doctors would place their knives down and turn toward a small altar. On it, a statue of Asclepius, a few sprigs of dried rosemary, and a cup of wine left over from the night before. They'd bow their heads, sprinkle a bit of burnt wood ash on the blade, then kneel on one knee, not out of repentance, but fear. Soft smoke rising from a smouldering resin torch, and in the dim light, you, the patient, lie there, hearing barely audible murmurs. If the gods wish to take someone today, may it be someone weaker. You want to believe he's joking, but no one mumbles like that if they're joking. You lie still, eyes wide open, swallowing dry spit. You whisper, "Are you sure you can do this?" The doctor, hand still resting on the hilt, smiles as if speaking to the gods, not you. "No, but the gods will guide my hand." And that's when you realize his faith is placed in the wrong being. He closes his eyes, places a hand on his forehead, then mutters as if apologizing to someone. "Oh healer God, if today my hand slips, please don't let the patient wake up to notice." Some places burned incense, drew symbols on the blade, or whispered names of ancient Greek physicians like a spell against failure. Some patients had their own prayers, their hands tied tight, their mouths silent, but their eyes never leaving the small statue tucked in their pocket. Because when lying on cold marble, a god was the only thing whose hands didn't tremble. The doctor would lift the blade toward the sky, stare into the blood-stained steel, and say, "The gods are just." And if he failed, the gods called him home. Everything was up to the gods. Everything was divinely irresponsible. In Roman medicine, the sharpest blade wasn't made of bronze. It was the unwavering belief that if you prayed enough, everything would be fine. The problem was, sometimes they forgot to pray before placing the blade on real human flesh. And when that happened, all that remained was a wound, and a regret no one was around to hear. You survived, or more precisely, you're still breathing. The surgery is over. No applause. Only the faint swish of the suture through skin and the sigh of the doctor. The doctor doesn't take you to a recovery room because there is no such room. You're dragged to the porch, laid out on a mat or an old linen sheet next to a man who just had his leg cut off. No painkillers, no antibiotics, no comforting words. Just the buzzing of mosquitoes and a few dried bloodstains from the last person on that same mat. You wake up in the middle of the night. Your guts feel like someone sitting on your stomach. Eyes blurry from thirst, ears ringing as night wind blows through cracks in the stone wall. A few meters away, the doctor has fallen asleep next to a statue of Asclepius, still holding the surgical knife, its edge crusted with dried brown blood. You breathe softly, afraid to move, not because of pain, but because if you move too much, someone might think you're dead and operate again. There's only a damp cloth placed on your forehead, and the advice, don't think too much. Thinking too much makes the wound worse. Sprinkle wood ash or clay. Apply crushed aromatic leaves with honey if you've got some. If infection, scrape it out, start over. Simple, like redoing a bad scene in a play. If stitches burst, stitch again with flax thread, thin rope, or if desperate, a family member's hair. If the patient has seizures, pour more wine, tie down the limbs, and chant to ward off toxins. If blood loss is severe, place a rooster next to the patient. They believe chicken blood absorbed evil energy. There's a record of a patient developing a fever post-op. The doctor said, "Good. Fever means the body is fighting." 3 days later, the patient died. The doctor remained optimistic. He fought bravely. The family was instructed, no meat for 3 days. Change the bandage if it smells strange. Pray to Asclepius every morning. And most importantly, don't blame the doctor if something goes wrong, because the disease part was removed. If he died, it was because of what remained. You become a legend. People come asking, what did it feel like to survive gut surgery? You smile, stare off into the distance and reply, "I think the doctor stitched the wrong thing." Then you laugh, then you clutch your belly, then you go silent. Post-op in ancient Rome wasn't recovery. It was the second battle, a quiet war between the old blade, the open wound, and the fragile hope that the human body knows how to heal, if not poked again. There's a truth that history books rarely emphasize. Many Roman doctors performed surgery, not entirely sober, not because they were sad, not because they lost faith, but because wine was cheap, easy to get, and believed to help steady the hand. Steadier hands, maybe. But the problem is, it also blurred the difference between liver and gallbladder. One doctor before operating, clinked glasses with the patient. One for courage, one for Asclepius, and the last one for luck. Then he sat down, sighed and said, "Now I'm ready. Are you?" The patient didn't reply, maybe from nerves, or maybe he'd already fainted. One doctor once described his experience operating while slightly tipsy. "I saw 2 livers. I thought, pick the worst looking one, but both were bright red. He chose one, sliced it, then realized it was the stomach. He simply sighed. Well, at least it's an organ. Misaligned pulse. Missed it. Blade too deep. Didn't notice. Stitching while humming a tune. Once finished and asked, what was I operating on again? The assistant, the only one still awake, silently watched, saw the doctor slice the wrong side, tried to intervene, but the doctor turned, smiled. Trust me, livers can move. The issue wasn't that doctors drank wine. The issue was that they believed wine connected them to the divine. And if the surgery went wrong, it was the will of the gods. If it went right, it was my skill. If the patient died, destiny. A logic chain, impossible to refute, because no one survived long enough to argue. A belief, very comforting for the one holding the knife, and very worrying for the one lying beneath it. One survivor once said, I saw the doctor cutting me, but his eyes were somewhere else. Maybe a vineyard, maybe heaven, but definitely not with me. Medicine, when wine is both the anesthetic and the inspiration, is not medicine. It's a coin toss with death. Modern people often ask, back then, surgeries like that, did anyone actually survive? The short answer is yes, but rarely. Abdominal abscess removal, about 30% survival rate. Gangrene limb amputation, about 40% survived 3 days. Skull surgery, survived, if the drill didn't go too deep. C-section, sorry, most were one-way journeys. And if someone did survive, they weren't called recovered patients. They were called miracles or divine favorites. There was a case where a doctor claimed a successful liver surgery. When the family asked, "Where's the liver?" he paused and replied, "I thought that was the kidney." The patient lived another 3 days, and after that was never mentioned again. On the stone tablet, the case was recorded as technically successful, failed due to divine will. Survival didn't mean full recovery. Many lived, but couldn't walk, couldn't eat, or just stared into space whispering, "Don't go near that knife." One man who survived intestinal surgery once said, "I'm alive, but ever since, the smell of wine makes me nauseous. Maybe because I have no liver left, or maybe trauma." Another man, after surviving skull surgery, woke up every morning checking his hair, not out of fear of baldness, but because, "I'm afraid I'll wake up one day with new stitches, like someone kept operating on me in my sleep." There were no machines, no lab tests, only the number of days the patient kept breathing. One doctor wrote in his journal, he lived 7 days after the surgery. That counts as success. Not sure how the patient felt, because on the 8th day, he wasn't around to disagree. And don't expect insurance. You lay on that table, signed with a nod. If you lived, be grateful. If you died, the gods called you first. The doctor was merely the messenger. In ancient Rome, medicine came with no guarantees, no risk assessments, only one certainty. If you lived, you'd tell the story. If not, the story would be told by the one who held the knife. survival wasn't measured in numbers. It was measured in the breath that lingered in the night when everyone else was asleep, except the one freshly stitched, staring at the ceiling and wondering, I wonder if that thread landed on the right side. No gloves, no masks, no sterilized blades, no operating lights, and no time to vomit out of disgust. Being a doctor in ancient Rome meant seeing human intestines sprawled across a table, wiping blood with bare hands, smelling pus, rot and things you don't want to name, and still keeping a straight face like you're watching the weather forecast. A real doctor wasn't allowed to wince, because if he did, the patient might die from panic before blood loss. It's recorded. If the doctor pulls out his hand and you see his face go pale, ask no questions, just pray. Cut open and found wriggling parasites. An abscess exploded mid-suture. The patient's intestines popped out and fell to the floor. A tooth fell into the wound. No one knows whose. Once I opened an old abscess. The smell was like a pickled rat corpse. I peeled back the skin and thought, maybe I should go into pottery. All of it had to be handled with a brush and pretend calm. No doctor was allowed to have a weak stomach, because if you faint, who stitches? If you puke, who cleans? If you run, who files the report to the gods? They weren't superheroes, but they trained themselves to separate emotions from the blade. A young doctor once wrote in his notebook, on day 1, the smell of blood made me want to throw up. On day 3, I saw intestines hit the floor and still had lunch like normal. That's not cold-blooded, it's adaptation. In a profession where, if you're scared, you can't save anyone. An old doctor once said, to save people, you must first endure the smell of them. And when surgery ended, the doctor didn't wash his hands. He went to drink more wine, to drown the stench and forget what he just saw. Being a doctor in ancient Rome wasn't just about holding a blade. It was about holding your sanity in a world where nothing was clean except willpower. Being a Roman doctor wasn't for the faint of stomach, because the patient's intestines wouldn't wait for your courage. They just popped out, like they had a mind of their own. And if you stepped back, they'd hit the ground like a reminder. Only the calm are allowed to hold someone else's life. Got appendicitis today? You'll get an ultrasound, a CT scan, a laparoscopic procedure with no scars, clean white beds, heart monitors, anesthesia, sedatives and painkillers. And if your surgery's 10 minutes late, you're allowed to complain. In ancient Rome, appendicitis, they'd guess. If they guessed right, they'd slice your belly with a blacksmith's knife. No anesthesia, no masks, no expectations. And if surgery's delayed, the gods are busy. Wait. Today, you wake up after surgery and someone asks, how are you feeling? Back then, if you woke up after surgery, your whole family threw a party. Not because you were cured, but because, oh look, still breathing. You're living in an era where wounds are stitched with dissolvable threads. Infections are treated with antibiotics. Doctors wash their hands before touching you. And if the doctor frowns, it's about the bill, not your intestines falling out. Sometimes the things we take for granted, like clean tissues, sterile scalpels, a quiet sorry in the hospital, are only 2,000 years away from silent groaning and steaming pus. We are living in a miracle. And if someone who had surgery in ancient Rome came back today, they'd look around and say, are you people in heaven? Homosexuality in ancient Greece, 650 6 and 25. If you're imagining an ancient Athens of white marble columns, philosophers sitting under golden sunlight discussing the universe, well, turn the brightness down a notch. Athens in 650 years before the Common Era was not a filtered city. It was dusty, smelled of wine, sweat, and public spaces were a mix of marketplace, gymnasium, and flirting floor. Here, men loved men, and then they dragged each other to battlefields and stabbed each other with spears. A society where intimacy and violence did not conflict, but coexisted like wine and olives at a feast. The agora, the central square, the place for everything: political debates, fish trading, philosophers dissecting justice, and looks exchanged without words. In a shaded corner by the fountain, couples of Erastes and Eromenos sat side by side, pretending to discuss ethics, but really seeing who remembered more lines of Theognis. In another corner, young warriors polished their spears, eyes never leaving the freestanding calves that passed by like Athens had become a marble catwalk. A grown citizen gazed after a youth walking by. That look wasn't hidden, nor needed to be. It was public, conventional, and even had unwritten law. In Athens, a man falling for a teenager was not strange. It was viewed as a social development, as long as he played the role correctly, as long as that love led to virtue, education, and civic ideals, as long as he was the pursuer, not the pursued. And this pursuit was not just striking up a conversation. It was a strategic sport, gifting on the right festivals, seeming passionate yet respectable, writing poetry without being cheesy, glancing long enough to be understood, but not too long to become indecent. Every look, every casual shoulder touch in the public baths was metaphor. A flirtation full of unspoken rules, where failure didn't cause a block, but caused public mockery next symposium. In that same space, the boys, who yesterday sat together playing lyres, wrote love poems, or wrestled sweaty and testosterone-rich, would the next morning pick up spears and go to war, not just to win, but to protect their beloved. Sound sweet? Yes, but also deadly. Athens was where romantic love between men tied directly into the ideal citizen model: bravery, loyalty, sacrifice. The philosopher Plato likened this love to a ladder up to the heavens, each rung a higher level of beauty, from physical to spiritual. And Aristophanes, the famous playwright, described humans once as rounded creatures with 4 arms and legs, split in 2 by Zeus. Since then, each person sought their other half. Not everyone found a woman. Many, he said, found a boy, simply because that was the soul's nature. A beautiful love, they believed, must help a boy become worthy of dying gloriously for the city. There was no focus on lifelong togetherness, but there was on die together in honor. What about women? Oh, they were at home, not present in the agora, could not vote, and absolutely not allowed to be lovers of any philosopher sitting cross-legged, debating pure love. Athens may have been the birthplace of democracy, but it was also a place where men openly loved men, while ignoring women as if they were mere decoration. You may find that contradictory, but to them it was all logical. Love was what honed virtue, and virtue was what steadied the spear hand. A true love was not living together into old age. It was standing side by side in battle, armor soaked in sweat, gazes fixed on each other, until the final thrust. The echo of footsteps on Athens's ground still resonates, dry wind rustling through unbroken column lines. a city where love was ritual, and ritual was part of war. A place where loving and killing weren't opposed, just two faces of the same drachma. Not all ancient Greek love was candlelit poetry or hold my hand under the Peloponnese moon. No, some loves functioned like an education system, a social contract, and, a bit, software design. See, ancient Greeks had a very specialized love model, Erastes and Eromenos, one who loves and one who is loved. One older, of status, of power, and one a teenager in puberty, still growing long legs, still speaking in a high voice, a soul still easy to reprogram. Picture a quiet morning in Athens, soft sunlight on the square, stones being swept, fish merchants calling. Amid it sits a familiar pair, an Erastes, around 30, tunic slightly wrinkled but posture steady, and an Eromenos, a slim youth, hair still dusted with chalk from yesterday's poetry lesson. They begin the day with exercise in the palestra, where Greek men trained their bodies and watched each other with unwavering eyes. Then they bathe together in the public baths. No words needed. Their gazes said enough. At midday, they attend a symposium, a wine party with diluted wine, quiet lyre music, and a Theognis poem whispered close to the ear. In the evening, the Erastes tutors the Eromenos in philosophy. But often the whole session revolves around one question. Can beauty exist independently of the one who beholds it? When the Eromenos blushes not knowing how to answer, the Erastes smiles, pours more wine, and says, "It's okay. Maybe you are that beauty." No dating app, no selfies. But the Erastes had his own crush game down. Instead of texting at 2 a.m, he sent a bronze bracelet inscribed with Theognis verses, tarnished but scented by sincerity and post-wrestling sweat. Gift-giving was an art, not too lavish to avoid showing off, not too cheap to avoid scorn. And if he wanted to touch hands, he'd accidentally adjust Eromenos' spear grip, a casual yet well-calculated act. And never forget, poetry was high-level weaponry. One line like, "You are the morning that makes me forget Plato's lessons," was enough to make his partner pretend to drop a wine cup in distraction. The Erastes was a licensed emotional mentor selling ethical software. He was the active pursuer, the gift giver, the moral instructor, the poet. You are the ray that lights my reason, and the reason I cannot focus on charging the neighbor who stole my grapes. A good Erastes needed reputation, credibility, and at least to play lyre or recite Hesiod without stumbling. He'd take Eromenos to the theatre, to wrestling, sit with him in the agora, as if discussing philosophy, though his eyes clearly said something else. And the Eromenos, he was a teen, about 12 to 17, skin still smelling of puberty, and eyes sparkling like newly minted helmets. He was expected to be passive but not foolish, responsive but not forward, and especially hold a strategically shy look. The Eromenos had the right to refuse, but if he agreed, he accepted not just love, but a training program to become a model citizen. Love with an Erastes wasn't about marriage. Later, he'd marry a woman, per society's plan, but about becoming worthy of leading the next generation. No papers signed, but society watched every polite touch. If an Erastes behaved rudely or too eagerly, he was mocked for losing civic dignity. If an Eromenos was overly receptive, he was shamed as too easy, not keeping youthful modesty. Sounds like modern dating. Exactly. Only instead of Tinder, they had wine parties, athletic training, and hidden potent lines slipped behind wine cups, You don't need to imagine. Socrates and his famous pupil Alcibiades are a vivid Erastes Eromenos pair in real life. Alcibiades was handsome, clever, and highly conflicted morally. Socrates was patient. He loved him not physically, at least by his account, but loved Alcibiades' soul, a soul not yet molded. In the Symposium, Plato allows Alcibiades to describe Socrates as a lover who refuses to admit he's a lover, the only one who made him feel ashamed and want to become better. But it was complicated. Alcibiades later betrayed Athens, switched sides like changing robes, and became the emblem of tension between idealism and desire. Their relationship stands both as the perfect illustration of enlightening love and a warning. Not every Eromenos can withstand the weight of expectations. Ancient Greeks did not see this as deviant. On the contrary, they believed an Erastes Eromenos love would teach the youth courage, self-respect, and how to engage with the concept of beauty. Plato described, "A young soul, when loved rightly, soars like a swan towards the light of intellect, and if loved wrongly, well then, the boy might drop out of studies, skip training, and start composing cheap poems to flirt with a new crush in Thebes." The thing is, this love was not meant to last forever. When the Eromenos matured, grew a beard, went to war, married a woman, the relationship had to end, partly by rule, partly because, if it lasted, society would ask, why is a man, now grown, still playing the pursued? Yes, it stung. A love ended not due to lack of affection, but because of social timetable. Not everyone wanted the roles of Erastes or Eromenos. There were other loves, where two men loved outside the template, without age difference, without structured teach-learn-split. But such affairs were quietly excluded from the party. They were not mentioned in poetry, not invited to counsel. Even a glance too long between two adult men was enough to cause whispers. Because when love wasn't ritualized, you weren't valid software. You were a bug, an exception to avoid. Some say ritualized love maintains virtue and society. But some, sitting at the edge of the agora, just wanted to love without playing any role. This was more than romance. It was ritual, an institution, a system. And to ancient Greeks, it worked like a social software update. You loved, you matured, you continued the cycle. Now you're the Erastes for the next generation. Like a code snippet reused through centuries. No debug needed, because any error meant you hadn't read enough Plato. If you still think the Erastes Eromenos relationship was just about physical intimacy, then please sit down. Put your drink down and open your mind like the first time you read Pindar's poetry, understanding nothing but nodding anyway. Because to the ancient Greeks, this love was a ritual of passing the flame of honor, from one who has seen battle to one about to enter life. Imagine honor as an ancient flame, not loud, not brilliant, but glowing steadily across generations of Athenian men. The Erastes was the torchbearer. The Eromenos was the dry wood, eager to burn, but not yet knowing how. And in every glance, every philosophical lesson, every shoulder touch during sword practice, a spark was being passed. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. A worthy Erastes could ignite in the young man a fire not for himself, but for the name he carried and the city he would defend. The Erastes was not merely a lover. He was responsible, not just for the Eromenos' heart, but for the civic virtue the youth would bear later. That means, if the Eromenos grew into a cowardly soldier, a corrupt man, or, worst, an incompetent poet, that failure wasn't just his. It was a disgrace for the Erastes. Picture it. This relationship functioned like a training system of character woven into passionate looks, no certificates, no medals. But if the Eromenos became a respected man, kind, brave, wise, people would whisper, he was once the student of a worthy Erastes. And conversely, if he failed, don't expect applause at the next wine party. Because in Athens, honor came not only from victory, but from the person you loved and what you learned from that love. If Athens used love to forge citizens, then Thebes, the northern city, took it further and militarized it. They formed the Lovers' Legion, 150 male pairs who loved each other and fought side by side. The reason? People fight bravely if they stand beside someone they love, not a smelly body full of wine breath. And they were right. This legion became an elite force, defeating even Sparta, the symbol of power, not by sharper spears, but by the bond of affection and honor. For Thebes, love was not weakness. Love was the reason to survive and die with virtue. You think love can't save you from a spear. The ancient Greeks thought otherwise. And Eromenos, trained in philosophy and affection, fought not just for the polis, but to be worthy in the eyes of his Erastes, standing across the battlefield or already fallen in an earlier fight. And sometimes a man wins not because he is stronger, but because he doesn't want to disappoint the other. Sex may be fleeting, but honor must be forged like a steel spear. A touch during sword training could be a promise. I not only love you now, but put my faith in the man you will become. And that is a promise not to be broken. To the one who taught me how to hold a spear, and how to keep a promise with your eyes, I don't know if you still live. I don't know if anyone told you about this morning's battle. But I stood firm. I did not step back, even though my legs trembled so I could not feel sand beneath my heels. I remember when you told me, live so that one day you won't need me. At that moment, I hated you. I hated you enough to wander into the forest alone and be trampled by a wild boar. But today, when I looked into the eyes of the youth I now guide and saw him look at me as I once looked at you, I understood. If one day the wind carries this note to you, know this. I burned, not for me, but for the fire you lit. In ancient Greek love, vows were not spoken. They were lived. No documents, but everyone understood. This was not just love, but the start of a chain of virtue. The younger received not only affection, but ideals. The elder gave not only experience, but expectations. And if all went well, there was no wedding at the end, but a silent ceremony where the Eromenos had matured and stepped out of the beloved role. No longer the pupil, no longer the boy, but a future Erastes. Athens allowed men to love men. But don't misunderstand. It was not a license for all forms of affection. Because in this same city, you might clap for a love poem between two young warriors. Then, soon after, throw real stones at a man, simply for loving in the wrong position. In Erastes Eromenos relationships, position was not merely personal, it was social judgment. An adult man discovered to be the passive partner, in their view, on the bottom, immediately lost civic dignity. Sounds absurd. To them, the logic was as solid as a Parthenon column. Giver, clam strong. Receiver, psalm weak. And an Athenian citizen must always be strong. A story in the Agora, where every rumor had weight. A man named Timarchos, once a celebrated warrior who defended Boeotia, became disgraced by whispers that he had been passive in a youthful relationship. Suddenly, his honor shattered like cheap pottery. He was named by Aristophanes in a comedy, buried in mockery such as, Timarchus fought with his left hand because his right was busy holding a man. No one invited him to speak. His sons were bullied. And during a citizens' assembly, he stood up, uninterrupted, but no one dared meet his eyes. A lifetime of reputation destroyed because he loved, not the right way. In Athenian society, they didn't need moral police because they had playwrights. Aristophanes was the best. In his plays, the stage became the moral frontier that was slain with laughter. Men who moaned too loudly while sword training or took soft steps in the phalanx all became jokes. And the audience laughed, not out of hate, but to preserve order. A punchline at the right moment, a sharp satire, could end a man's career faster than any law. In Athens, prejudice didn't need to shout. It just needed a hit play. No law stated adults may not be passive lovers. But if you tried, poems mocked, whispers in the square, and denied the right to speak at the council. Aristophanes' comedies were full of jabs about those who groaned too much during sword practice, or had movements soft as a miswashed tunic. In other words, Greek society permitted men to love each other, but only if you loved like a victor. Compared to many contemporary cultures, like early Rome or ancient Judea, where homosexuality was condemned, Athens looked progressive, allowing men to love, even celebrating it in poetry and art. But don't be fooled. This openness was a golden cage. You could love, write poetry, exchange glances, but only if you were in the right role, at the right age, of the right gender, with the right attitude. While other societies used laws to ban it, Athens used laughter, voyeur glances, and comedies to control it, a form of censorship without punishment, because honor was enough execution. Modern scholars ask, was Athens sexually free, or free only for the dominant? The answer, perhaps, lies in the averted glance of a man whispered to have grown soft with a younger boy. There was love, but no right to weakness. Romance, but no equality. Some Erastes truly loved, but acted aloof. Some Eromenos wanted to stop, but remained strategically shy. And adult men still loved, but no longer dared show a gentle gaze, because that gaze could be cut apart into mocking verse. Love in ancient Greece, seemingly open, was actually surrounded by invisible walls. A whisper in one ear could be celebrated as philosophy, but the same whisper in many ears might be a death sentence. The greatest irony, they exalted beauty and love between men, but only when that love adhered to the rigid angles of tradition. There's one thing philosophers often forget to mention about love between men in ancient Greece. They didn't just write poetry, they also had to go kill people. You can hear an Erastes whisper, "Be brave, because I am watching you." And then the next morning, the Eromenos puts on armor, shoulders his spear, not out of hatred for the Theban army, but because he doesn't want to disappoint the other. In that society, ideal love didn't lead to marriage. It led to a noble death, a death on the battlefield, under the admiring gaze of other men. Not everyone lived long enough to love. But dying for a lover was considered the pinnacle of honor. They say love is like armor, protecting us from loneliness. But in ancient Athens, that armor was bronze, shining, and prone to cracking. It protected the Eromenos from enemy spears, but it couldn't protect him from the fear whenever he saw his Erastes enter battle without looking back. It helped the Erastes become a hero, but did nothing to silence the nagging question in his mind. If he dies, what reason do I have to fight? And when the armor broke, love didn't melt like wax. It shattered, quietly, like a cut to the chest, unseen but bleeding inside. Love in ancient Athens did not take place in rose gardens. It unfolded in public baths, in dusty training grounds, or in the cries of wounded soldiers. The Erastes taught the Eromenos how to steady himself when stabbed. The Eromenos wrote poems about longing while wiping blood off his armor. Romance back then did not involve candles. It smelled of rusty iron, human flesh, and the very real fear that you might die before one final embrace. Athens didn't raise lovers to gaze at the moon. They raised them to fight harder. A man feared dishonor more than pain. A teenager wanted to prove himself worthy of love. A generation learned to love by learning how to die. And that's the tragedy. No matter how beautiful love between two people was, it was co-opted as a weapon. One story from Marathon. Two young soldiers, an Erastes named Cleon and an Eromenos named Thais, stood side by side in the pale dawn. They knew today was the big battle. They knew the chance both would survive was almost none. Cleon placed his hand on Thais' shoulder and said softly, "If I don't return, don't write poems for anyone else. Let words sleep in your chest." Thais smiled, a smile tinged with fear. "If you die, I'll find someone better to write poems, but no one knows how to write your name like you did." They did not kiss, did not embrace. They simply stood still, letting a moment become immortal, at least in the memory of whoever survived. No discussion of Greek war and love is complete without mentioning Patroclus, friend, comrade, and perhaps unnamed lover of Achilles. Patroclus died in the Trojan War, wearing Achilles' armor, fighting in his place to uphold his honor. That death was not just personal tragedy, but the moment Achilles' roar became bestial, and the greatest Greek hero for the first time no longer wanted to remain alive. When Achilles dragged Hector's body around the city, it was not only revenge, but an unspoken lament for the fallen. A love hidden in epic, but anyone reading it understood. Patroclus' death was not just loss. It was a wound that could not be healed in the heart of a hero. Some Erastes returned from battle, shield torn, burdened by bad news. Some Eromenos grew up never daring to love again, because the first one they loved died by the Halys River. There were no medals, just a half-finished poem, and a survivor to read it, in tears. Between the white marble statues, speeches, and verses, if you listen closely, you can hear the cries of horses, flesh sputtering on the field, and the ragged breaths of someone struggling to hold back grief for a lost beloved. Don't think Athens was the only center for male love in ancient Greece. Athens may have written many poems and set many rules, but other city-states, though quieter, had their own drama. Not just theory, Thebes had living evidence of love intertwined with honor. Their two most famous generals, Pelopidas and Epaminondas, are mentioned in ancient records as a deep same-sex couple, bonded not only in battle but in political strategy. They didn't need to declare it publicly, they just needed to win. And whenever Theban armies triumphed, people whispered, they didn't fight just for the homeland, they fought for each other. Their story was a vivid illustration of what Thebes understood early on. When people love each other, they don't betray each other in combat. If Athens tied love to education, then Thebes, the northern polis, turned love into military strategy. There, they founded the sacred band, 150 male pairs, each consisting of a warrior and his beloved. The reason? Soldiers fight more bravely side by side with someone they don't want to lose. And the result? Extraordinary. They once defeated Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra, something no one dared imagine, proving that love, when combined with honor, can be the sharpest weapon of all. Between cold stone walls, flickering torchlight, and the murmur of the night wind, young Spartan warriors lay side by side on the floor. No mattresses, no blankets, only warmth from shoulder to shoulder, and light touches passed instinctively. They didn't say, "I love you," but they shared the last portion of their rations. They steadied each other when one faltered in training. They didn't write poetry, but the looks exchanged under campfires in the woods were sometimes heavier than any words. In Sparta, affection didn't need explanation. It existed like muscle, no proof needed, only readiness. Sparta didn't write love poetry. They didn't hold festivals for male love poetry. But it was a place where men lived almost entirely with other men from boyhood to adulthood, from training fields to battlefields, and slept together in barracks throughout their youth. Comrades' affection was an understood bond, nothing written, nothing sung. But in a society where women were nearly entirely excluded from military life, male-male relationships naturally arose, deep and intimate. In Crete, they went even further. A ritual known as the kidnapping ritual. A man would kidnap a youth he loved with tacit family consent and lead him to the mountains for weeks. During that time, the two lived together, hunted, shared meals, and formed a bond. When they returned, the youth was welcomed as an adult, with new honor and often a bronze token. This love was not hidden. It was a rite of passage into adulthood. In Delphi, religious rituals included incense and prophecy. There is evidence of same-sex relationships among male priests, seen as sacred unions, not shameful. And in Lesbos, where the female poet Sappho wrote soul-stirring verses about love between women, affections among women were recognized in art, though not widely documented officially. These city-states didn't have Athens' systematized love, Thebes' militarized love, nor Crete's ritualized love. But they show one thing. Love between same-sex partners was not exceptional. It was realized everywhere, in many forms. If Athens used philosophy to explain love, Thebes used the spear. Sparta used silence. Crete used its cultural script. No place was identical. But all prove love between men was not an exception in ancient Greek culture. It was part of social fabric, even if not always openly named. Because although every place had love, there were always some who didn't fit roles, couldn't speak it, couldn't meet eyes, or loved in ways without official categories. Some loves end because of betrayal. Some loves end because of war. In ancient Athens, male love usually ended because he had grown up. Not grown in mindset, but grown by civic age. Specifically, turning 18. In the Erastes and Eromenos model, the most beautiful love was when the older led the youth. The Eromenos was young, poetry, student to be shaped. But when he passed the age threshold of 18, eligible for citizenship, that role had to end. No one said it outright. But if the two remained together after that, the older would be seen as weak, obsessed, even unable to know where to stop. It is a beautiful and sad paradox of that love, and it began in glory but always carried an hourglass inside. Each time the Eromenos grew taller, his voice deeper, his steps steadier. That love, no matter how deep, had to withdraw, like a small flame shielded from wind. Sometimes the end came not with words. It came with a gift, a bronze ring, a flute, a new cloak. The Erastes didn't say congratulations on growing up. He simply placed the object in the youth's hand and walked away, as if it were just routine. And the Eromenos, not fully understanding yet, will think, this is the last date. But when he blows the flute for the first time, in a sleepless night, he understands. It is a song with no reply, no letters, no final meeting in the park, just that day, the older one doesn't come anymore. And the next morning, the youth rises and walks straight past his former Erastes in the agora. No bow, no smile. Because now he is a man. And men do not allow others to teach them with love poems. Maybe because it was time limited, the Erastes Eromenos love became intense. Because everyone knew it must end. Not because feelings faded, but because society wouldn't allow it to continue. The Erastes would grow older, with a poem he never dared send. The Eromenos would mature, sometimes remembering, but only while pouring wine for someone else. The Erastes passes through the agora as usual, scroll in hand, eyes scanning familiar faces. But this morning something is different. The youth is there, taller now, cloak straight, walk assured. And beside him is another youth, bright eyes, shy smile, just as he once was. They see each other. A moment long enough for both to understand, and short enough that no one nods. The Erastes smiles, without bitterness, only silently, because now the other one has begun doing what he once did, giving the first look. And so the cycle continues. Love between men in ancient Greece, even when celebrated, always carried a silent countdown, from the first glance to the last sword lesson, to the day no one comes anymore. When people tell stories of ancient Greek love, they tell of Achilles and Patroclus, of Socrates and Alcibiades, of young men with spears in hand, reciting poems, gazing at each other in the agora. But they do not speak of their wives. No one mentions the woman who lit the lamp, waiting for her husband's return from a philosophy lecture, or the girl washing clothes for the man who just wrote a love poem for another youth. She wakes before dawn, not for poetry, but for unfinished grinding. She sweeps the courtyard, boils water, makes the bed for her husband, prepares watered-down wine if there are guests that day. She peers toward the light at the door, where she is not welcome. No agora, no philosophy, no council or square, only brick walls, footsteps of servants, and a few flies buzzing around the mill. At midday, she teaches her child counting. No one thanks her. No one calls that education. By afternoon, she sews a torn cloak that her husband wore when listening to Socrates speak of beauty. At night, she hears her husband turn in bed and call the name of a youth. She does not ask, just turns away, and again thinks, tomorrow, I still have to rise before the sun. Women in ancient Athens lived behind wooden doors, literally. They were not allowed to attend council, not allowed to study, not allowed to love anyone besides their husband. And often, that husband didn't love her. He will never read these lines, because if he knew my thoughts, then I would be wrong. I know my role: weave cloth, bear children, keep the hearth. I have known since 12, but last night, when he looked past me and spoke another boy's name, I wanted permission to break, just once. Not because he should love me, just one question. Are you okay with me? But I understand. Women are not allowed to be loved. They are only to be kept. She crumples the paper and throws it into the fire. The flame flares, and ash clings to her hands, like every day. Marriage in Athens was a civic duty. A girl married at 13 or 14, living with a husband sometimes older than her father. Love? No one speaks of it. Romance? Not needed. As long as she bears sons to carry on the line and hold the land. They lie there at night, while their husband dreams of spear practice with his Eromenos the day before. They stare at the ceiling and wonder if they will ever be loved as poems describe. In the Odyssey epic, Penelope is praised as the ideal wife, chaste, patient, cleverly refusing suitors for 20 years. But Homer does not tell what she thought when night fell. No one asks. Was Penelope lonely? Did she ever dream of someone beyond Odysseus? They wrote thousands of lines about her husband's adventures, but not a single line about her dreams. Because in Greek poetry, women are places to return to, not people allowed to leave. You can find hundreds of ancient Greek poems about love between men, but hardly any written by Greek men about their wives in romantic language. No one wrote, "She makes my heart race like wind upon the Aegean Sea." No, they only wrote that about their lovers, and left their wives by the hearth with wrists covered in ash. They say women of old were modest, gentle, but their silence did not come from virtue. It came from having no voice, not because they didn't know how to love, but because society did not allow their love to exist, not on paper, not in poetry, not in memory. One night, when Athens slept deeply, a wife turned away from her husband, knowing he had just whispered the name of a young boy in his sleep. She did not stay angry, just felt the coldness, not from the breeze, but because that love was never meant for her. Love in ancient Athens didn't stop at a look. It stepped out of the bedroom, climbed the lecture platform, touched the assembly floor, and ultimately shaped how a society functioned. An imagined night between Socrates and Alcibiades. Imagine a night where Alcibiades, young, slightly tipsy, beautiful like a statue, sits before Socrates, the oil lamp's light reflecting in his eyes. He says, "If I love you with both body and soul, why do you only take half?" Socrates doesn't answer at once. He just smiles softly, then asks, "If you want to climb Parnassus, would you choose someone to carry you or someone to guide you?" Alcibiades looks downward, slightly blushing. "I want to be carried, but I also want to know the way." Socrates nods. "Then walk by my side. Don't lie in someone's arms." That night, they may not touch, but that question, that look, became the lesson. And in ancient Athens, nights like those were the first philosophy classes. Socrates taught not just through questions, but through relationship. He had many students, but one mentioned more than the rest. Alcibiades, young, beautiful, and enamored. In Plato's Symposium, Alcibiades appears drunk, confessing he once offered himself to Socrates, but Socrates refused. Why? Because to him true love didn't lie in the body, but in helping the young reach the good. And so, in ancient Athens, loving, teaching, elevating the soul, and when done rightly, sex could be merely a stepping stone for philosophy to bloom. Athens didn't have modern schools. They educated the next generation through love. The Erastes, the older lover, taught. The Eromenos, the younger, was the student. In that relationship, the youth learned how to think, speak, even stand and sit. The elder had responsibility to instill ethics, ideals, and civic loyalty. Love became a semi-formal model for nurturing citizens. And if that surprises you, remember, Athens built its democracy on people who learned to love rightly. In many cases, love was no longer a personal choice. It was a means to bind loyalty between superior and subordinate, between general and soldier. The sacred band of Thebes is the classic example. Beloved pairs fought side by side, unlikely to betray each other, and therefore unlikely to betray their city. On another level, philosophers also used love to gain political influence. A loved student, likely loyal. A citizen guided properly. Votes the way you want. When love is systematized, when it becomes a tool to teach ethics, to consolidate power, the line between ideal and abuse blurs. Some Erastes genuinely taught Eromenos with real affection, but others exploited the guise of guidance to seize a youth's body and future. If you are a thinker, you might say you create knowledge from love. But if you are an outsider, you'll ask, so who controls the love? Who is loved? And who is used? Maybe you are not Alcibiades, not an Erastes, not living in Athens, not writing poems on papyrus or wielding spears on training grounds. But if you have stayed up at night because someone didn't text back, if you have hidden your feelings for fear of being judged, if you have quietly loved someone you know will never love you back, then you understand them better than any historian. We talk of warriors, philosophers, students, but beneath those cloaks are people who long for someone to hold their hand in the cold, hoping someone's gaze will anchor them in a crowd, wishing love did not need to be proven or explained. More than 2,000 years ago, someone lay awake over unreturned affection. Someone couldn't speak their true feelings. Someone was only allowed to love within the limits of a ritual, a system, a sanctioned structure. And they still lived, still loved, still wrote poems from their hearts, though no one praised, no one carved their names in stone. Perhaps you lie alone now, or hide in a bathroom stall, earbuds in place to drown out the sighs. Whoever you are, thank you for coming this far. Not because you made it to the end, but because you dared to feel gently. Not everything we love lives forever, but everything that lives on was once loved quietly.